They used to speak like my silence proved something. Like my calm was shame. Like I didn't measure up because I never listed titles next to my name. She laughed the loudest. Always polished, always loud, always listing promotions like parade floats. But no one heard the sound my keyboard made at 2 a.m. No one saw the lines of code, the quiet deals, the lonely victories. They thought I was idle, floating, uncertain. I let them think so, until she walked into my office. And her voice, that voice that once swallowed mine, fell utterly still. My name is Jenna Riley, 33 years old, based in Atlanta, Georgia. And this is the story of how the quiet one built everything they couldn't see, until it towered over their pride. I grew up in a house where ambition had a dress code. My father wore suits even on Sundays, polished leather shoes clicking against marble floors like metronomes of purpose. My mother measured success by the weight of diplomas and the length of job titles. We weren't allowed to fail quietly. Everything had to be marked, announced, celebrated, then bettered. At 10, I said I wanted to be an artist. My dad smiled and handed me a children's book on accounting. At 14, I loved writing short stories. My mom called it a hobby, not a life. By 16, I was already being prepped for the Ivy League. Tutors, internships, college counselors. The future was planned down to the month. And then came Danielle. Danielle Sullivan was my cousin, but we were raised more like twins. She was 6 months older, always louder, always shinier. Where I was introspective and steady, she was boisterous and magnetic. Every holiday, every family event, every group chat revolved around what Danielle had accomplished. She just got into Stanford's business school. She's interning with a major consulting firm in New York. She just got promoted, again. Even as a teenager, I felt myself shrinking in her shadow. I followed the path, though. I got into Emory University, studied economics like I was told, wore stiff blazers to career fairs, sat through interviews that left my throat dry and my smile cracked. I landed a consulting job right after graduation. Danielle had already been in the industry for 2 years by then, and she welcomed me with a LinkedIn message that said, "Now we're colleagues. Let the race begin," winking face with them. I laughed when I read it, but it wasn't funny. The job was fine on paper. 6 figures. Corporate cards. Hotel points. Conferences in Vegas. Long days in glass buildings filled with people who used buzzwords like currency. But every Sunday night, I'd get this pressure behind my eyes. I'd stand in the shower and wonder how water could feel so heavy. I'd stare at spreadsheets and feel like my soul was dissolving into cells and formulas. I kept going. You do when everyone tells you this is the dream. You don't want to seem ungrateful. At Thanksgiving, my uncle raised a toast to Danielle for closing a $1 million deal. My name didn't come up. I was sitting right there. My dad offered me a smile and said, "She's doing well too." Quietly. Quietly. That word stuck to me like a shadow I couldn't peel off. The truth is, I wasn't just tired. I was unraveling. 3 years into the job, I started getting migraines that would pulse behind my left eye like a signal begging me to stop. I couldn't sleep without waking up in the middle of the night, heart racing as if I'd forgotten something important. I stopped calling friends back. I missed my sister's engagement dinner. My therapist told me I was dangerously close to burnout. I told her I didn't have time for burnout. But the day I walked out of the office and couldn't remember where I parked, even though I'd parked in the same spot every day for a year, something cracked. I quit the next morning. No big speech. No plan. Just a quiet email and a slower heartbeat. My family was stunned. My mother asked if I was sick. My father asked if I'd been fired. Danielle called and said, "You'll figure it out. You've always been the sensitive one." I said thank you. I didn't correct her. For a while, I pretended I was figuring it out. I went to coffee shops and opened my laptop like I had something brewing. I scrolled through job boards, LinkedIn posts, startups looking for visionaries. I felt like a fraud walking among builders. At dinner, my mom would say, "She's just taking a break." My aunt whispered, "We don't talk about that anymore." And Danielle, she filled the silence. I just got promoted to senior regional strategy lead, she announced at our cousin's wedding. The title's ridiculous, right? But the pay is great. She laughed like she'd earned the right to. I nodded and smiled. Everyone else clapped. No one asked what I was doing. I wasn't sure myself. But in the quiet that followed, days that blurred together, nights that hummed with loneliness, I began writing again. Nothing profound. Just sketches of ideas, business models, tools I wished I had when I worked in consulting. A system for internal communication. An onboarding tool for remote teams. A calendar app that syncs with your mental bandwidth, not just your time. It was silly at first. A way to pass the time. But one morning, I opened my laptop and realized I'd built the bones of a prototype. It didn't look like much. Just color blocks and code snippets. But it worked. I didn't tell anyone. Not even my sister. That was the beginning. Of something I didn't have a name for yet. Of something I wasn't sure would become anything at all. But for the first time in years, I felt like I had started over. No applause. No commentary. No LinkedIn banner. Just me. And no one noticed. Starting over doesn't look like it does in movies. There's no montage of triumph, no dramatic shift. Just quiet mornings, coffee that goes cold while you think, and tiny, invisible victories that don't earn applause. After months of pretending I was still figuring things out, I gave myself permission to build. Really build. I stopped chasing job boards and started learning again. UI/UX, project management, Python, and system architecture. I watched YouTube tutorials late into the night. Scribbled in notebooks like a teenager sketching dreams. My apartment floor became a graveyard of sticky notes. The kind of messy chaos that would have horrified my mother. But I was waking up excited. And that was new. The prototype I had built, a dynamic internal communication tool, started taking shape. I called it Pulse. At first, it was nothing fancy. Just a streamlined way for small teams to share updates, check in on each other's workload, and flag burnout early. It was part tech, part empathy engine. I offered it for free in a few online Slack communities, just to see what would happen. What happened surprised me. A week later, I got an email from a woman named Margot Ramirez, the HR director at a nonprofit in Seattle. We've been using Pulse for a few days and already noticed a difference. One of our volunteers said it gave her permission to breathe. Whatever you're doing, please keep going. I read that email 3 times, then cried into my keyboard. It wasn't some grand business milestone. But for the first time, someone I didn't know was telling me, this matters. Encouraged, I created a simple landing page. Nothing flashy, just a description, a free download, a contact form. Within a month, 23 teams had signed up. That's when I started getting messages from founders, team leads, and overwhelmed managers who just wanted their people to feel seen. There was a moment that shifted something inside me. A message came through the site. The subject line read, "You brought my baby into my living room." I opened it, heart racing. It was from a woman named Cheryl Holt, a 67-year-old retired teacher from Michigan who had started volunteering part-time for a local digital literacy program. They'd started using Pulse to manage their team and schedule training sessions. Cheryl had never used Slack, Zoom, or anything more advanced than email. Pulse, she said, was the first tool that didn't make her feel stupid. "This machine hates me," she'd muttered to a younger volunteer one day, frustrated and embarrassed. He smiled and said, "Try that green tab, Miss Cheryl." Just once. She clicked. It opened a video message from her grandson, who was also on the volunteer team. He'd used Pulse's asynchronous video feature to show her how to use the platform. He ended it with, "Love you, Grandma. Proud of you." Cheryl wrote, "I cried right there in front of the monitor. Your tool gave me back something I thought I lost, the feeling of belonging in a world that moved too fast for me." I read her email out loud to myself, then read it again, then printed it and taped it above my desk. It didn't make headlines, but it mattered. And the more I listened to stories like hers, the more I realized something important. People didn't just need software. They needed space. They needed design that spoke like a friend, not a supervisor. Tools that gave them permission to slow down without falling behind.
So I leaned into that.
Every new feature I built had one question at its center. Does this make someone feel more human? I added emotion-based check-ins. Feeling overwhelmed, running low today, need a win. Not just status, in progress. I integrated a quiet hour alert, automatically triggering a message to teammates when someone was consistently working late. A gentle nudge, not a reprimand. It started catching on, not virally, not explosively, but intentionally, like a garden growing where no one expected it. I was working 12-hour days again, but I wasn't drained. I was building something real. I hired a freelance designer from Portland, a part-time back-end developer from Austin. Both people I met in obscure forums who believed in what Pulse was becoming. We weren't a company yet. We didn't have funding, but we had users. We had stories. And we had this strange, quiet momentum. Sometimes I'd still get texts from Danielle. Just landed in Chicago. Off to lead a workshop on hybrid team scaling. How's your sabbatical going? I didn't reply. Not out of spite. Just clarity. I wasn't on sabbatical. I was working harder than ever. But for the first time in my life, the work felt like mine. No job title. No approval. No one clapping from the sidelines. Just purpose. Thick and invisible like oxygen. One night, around 1:45 a.m., I sat back in my chair, eyes burning from screen time, and looked around my tiny home office. Plants on the windowsill. A whiteboard filled with scribbles and possible integrations. Sticky notes everywhere. And a single photo frame. Me and my younger sister at the lake when we were kids. Before titles mattered. Before comparisons crushed us. I whispered, "We're doing okay, huh?" The apartment didn't answer. But it didn't need to. I was finally building something that wasn't meant to impress anyone.
Just serve someone.
And for the first time, that was enough. 6 months into building Pulse, we hit our first 1,000 users. Not visitors, users. People who logged in daily, who sent messages about burnout alerts that helped their team pause and recalibrate. Small co-ops, nonprofits, scrappy tech teams, virtual therapy groups. No Fortune 500 logos. But people who actually used it. People who said, "We feel seen." By then, I'd hired 2 full-time developers, Ben from Ohio and Malika from Sacramento. They were both in their 20s, fresh out of college, but already brilliant. I couldn't afford corporate salaries, but I offered flexibility, equity, and purpose. I didn't run the company like a CEO. I ran it like a builder. And slowly, Pulse stopped being a project. It became a company. We crossed $20,000 in MRR by month 8. I had to Google what MRR meant when my accountant first said it. We were onboarding 1,200 new users per month, largely by word of mouth. We had a 78% email open rate on our digest, a metric even major platforms envy. I didn't fully understand what those numbers meant until investors started reaching out. I turned down 3 early offers. Not because I was arrogant, but because I knew we weren't ready. We weren't a product yet. We were still a promise. Meanwhile, I was still operating out of my 1-bedroom apartment in Midtown Atlanta. My office was a corner nook with IKEA shelves and a second-hand standing desk. My servers were running from a rented virtual environment I paid for monthly on a debit card.
Danielle called me around that time.
She said, "Just checking in. Mom told me you're still working on that thing. How's it going?" I told her we'd hit 1,000 users. She replied, "Cute. User growth is so addictive in the beginning. Feels like you're going viral, huh?" I laughed politely. What I didn't say was, those users weren't just numbers. They were names, stories, struggles. They were the Cheryl Holtz of the world, finally feeling included. But Danielle didn't want stories. She wanted metrics. A few days later, we ran a successful case study with a women's shelter in Denver. Pulse had helped their part-time team reduce burnout-related turnover by 41% over 6 months. They sent us a thank you video, all of them holding handwritten signs that said, "You helped us stay human." I cried watching it. No one else saw it. At Christmas, I went home to visit family. Danielle flew in from San Francisco, arrived in a black SUV with wheels that cost more than my rent. She came in talking about a strategic cross-sector integration project she was leading.
No one asked what that meant.
Everyone just nodded, impressed. At dinner, she raised a toast to vision, velocity, and vertical growth. Everyone clapped. My mother glanced at me and said, "Jenna's doing her thing too. That little app she's building." Danielle turned to me, smirking. "Still helping people click buttons?" I smiled. "Still helping people feel seen." She blinked, then sipped her wine. That conversation could have gutted me a year ago. Now it just rolled off like static. I realized something strange during that visit. No matter how much I grew, to my family, I was still the one who quit. The one who burned out. The one who walked away from a real job. In their eyes, Danielle was a star.
I was a hobbyist.
Never mind that I now had a payroll of 6. Never mind that we had retention rates most SaaS companies dream of. Never mind that I had bootstrapped a product used in 14 countries. The world outside saw us as equals. But in that dining room, I was invisible. One night, my father pulled me aside. He looked concerned. "You know, Jenna, if this doesn't work out, it's okay to come back. We still have friends at Deloitte." I stared at him. "It's working," I said. He looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language. That's when I realized something deeper. Success only counts to some people if they can recognize the shape of it. If it fits into the boxes they trust. If it comes with a salary slip and a corner office they can see. My office was in the cloud. My team was in 3 time zones. My product wasn't printed on glossy brochures. It lived in quiet moments of relief across the world. And so they couldn't see it. But it was real. One night, back in Atlanta, I was debugging a sync issue when Malika messaged me. "Hey, just wanted to say, thanks. I've never had a boss who cared about my emotional load. You changed how I see work." I stared at that message for a long time. I copied it into a folder called "Why I'm Still Doing This." Later that week, we were featured in a niche productivity podcast. Downloads spiked. I got 5 new demo requests that night. But the next day, during our family Zoom call for Grandma's birthday, no one mentioned Pulse. Danielle talked about her latest acquisition. My aunt raved about her new kitchen remodel. I stayed quiet. Not out of shame. Out of peace. I had started something that no one understood.
But the world did.
And someday, whether they saw it or not, I knew they would walk into a room shaped by my hands. It started like any other Monday. We just rolled out a major Pulse update, version 2.5, with integrated wellness analytics and auto-scheduled check-ins. The response had been great, but the back end was buggy. My team was juggling patches across 5 time zones. I hadn't slept much. I was on my 3rd cup of black coffee, pacing the office barefoot, hair in a bun, hoodie stained with Thai curry from the night before. Our Atlanta co-working space had recently expanded, and I'd rented a small private suite, a glass-walled box with my desk, a couch, and a fern named Gerald. That morning, Iris, the building's front desk coordinator, buzzed in. "Hey Jenna, you've got someone here for a tour." "Danielle Sullivan?" "She said she's your cousin." I nearly dropped my mug.
Danielle?
I hadn't seen her in person since last Christmas. I took a deep breath.
Yeah.
Send her up. 30 seconds later, she was standing in the doorway, designer heels clicking against the concrete floor, holding an oat milk latte and a small Louis Vuitton tote. Hair sleek. Nails perfect. That same familiar smirk tugging at the corners of her mouth.
Wow.
"Look at you," she said, stepping inside like she owned the air. "Little CEO vibes." I laughed softly. "Hardly. Just a glorified janitor with Wi-Fi." She looked around. The room was modest but clean. 2 laptops. Whiteboard. Books on UX and burnout psychology. Photos of user teams taped to one wall. She took it all in like a realtor inspecting a property too far below budget. "So, this is it? Pulse HQ." I nodded. "It's not much, but it runs the whole thing." She walked toward the wall of photos, team shots sent in by users, volunteers, mental health orgs. I watched her face shift as she read the sticky notes. One read, "This app helped us survive lockdown." Another. Pulse saved our team from imploding. She turned back to me. You really built this from your apartment?
Yeah.
No funding. Bootstrapped. Some grants, now revenue supported. She nodded, mouth slightly open. For once, no punchline. Then she laughed, but it wasn't smug this time. It sounded almost disarmed. I actually didn't come here to snoop. I'm leading a panel tomorrow for the Metro Atlanta Business Forum. One of the speakers bailed last minute, and someone from the committee suggested Pulse. I said, no way, that's my cousin's thing. They told me they'd heard incredible feedback. That Pulse is being used by the Department of Youth Services. I blinked. We just onboarded them last week. Yeah. Apparently one of the coordinators said it transformed their remote workflow. Said it rescued morale. Her words, not mine. She shook her head and chuckled again, quieter. So, I looked you up on LinkedIn. Still pretty blank. No titles. No company updates. Just one line. I build tools for humans. I thought, that's so Jenna. I smiled. What did you expect it to say? Honestly, I thought you were still tinkering with freelance stuff. That it was a side hustle. It started that way.
She paused.
You know, I had someone message me last week. A woman named Cheryl Holt. She was looking for someone at Pulse to thank. Said her nonprofit had implemented it, and her team felt less overwhelmed. I assumed it was some VC-backed company with a huge team. She said whoever made it helped her find her feet again. My chest tightened. Cheryl's why I kept building. I know. That's why I'm here. The silence was different now. Not awkward. Reverent. Danielle walked over to my desk. Her gaze landed on a sketchpad, open to a new onboarding flow I was mapping out. She touched the edge of the page. This is really something. It's still growing. Yeah, she said, barely a whisper. It's already grown bigger than most of us will ever know. For the first time, Danielle wasn't the center of the room. She was a visitor, a witness. I don't think I ever really saw you, she said, voice low. I swallowed the lump rising in my throat. You weren't the only one. She looked at me, searching, then back at the photos, the notes, the tiny, invisible fingerprints of all the people Pulse had reached. You built something people can't stop talking about. And you never said a word about it. I didn't build it to talk about it. She nodded, sat down on the couch. Honestly, I thought I was winning. Promotions.
Flights.
Paychecks. Titles. And maybe I was for a while.
She paused.
But no one's ever cried because of a spreadsheet I made. I smiled gently. Spreadsheets matter, too.
Sure.
But not like this. She glanced toward the door, then back at me. You're speaking on my panel tomorrow. What? You heard me. You're going to talk about Pulse. About rebuilding. About silent victories. I'll introduce you. Danielle, I don't. It's not a request. I already submitted your name. The committee approved it in 5 minutes. I stared at her. She was serious. And for once, it wasn't about her. Thank you, I said softly. She stood up and smoothed her blazer. Thank you for reminding me what impact actually looks like. She walked to the door, hand on the knob, then turned back one last time.
Oh.
And your office, that's perfect. Then she left. I stood there in the quiet. The sun poured through the blinds, casting long shadows across the whiteboard and floor. The fern rustled gently from the breeze. And for the first time, I let the moment in. Not because I demanded attention, but because the truth walked in by itself and refused to stay quiet. The Metro Atlanta Business Forum was held inside a massive hall at the Hyatt Regency, decked in blue banners and glossy sponsor logos. I arrived 30 minutes before my scheduled talk, clutching a flash drive and trying to keep my palms from sweating through my blouse. Danielle found me backstage. Gone was the polished cousin who once weaponized sarcasm like perfume. She was calm.
Proud.
She introduced me to 3 different organizers as the woman who rebuilt the burnout conversation from scratch. That phrase stuck with me. I stepped on stage as founder of Pulse, And not one person in that room knew that 2 years ago, I was a sobbing mess on a hardwood floor, convinced my career had flatlined. They didn't know about the ramen weeks, the power outages, the jobs I'd silently lost because I wasn't as loud as the others. But when I spoke about empathy in design, I saw heads nodding. When I explained how Pulse started from desperation, how I just wanted to feel heard again, people leaned forward. I didn't use corporate buzzwords or stats-heavy slides. I told the story.
Raw. Honest.
About Danielle's offhand, cute comment and how it lit a fire under me. About building something not for profit, but for people. About rediscovering my own voice by designing a tool for others to use theirs. And when I finished, there was silence. Then applause. And then a standing ovation. I stepped off stage stunned. Danielle was waiting by the curtain, clapping like a proud older sister. She didn't say much, just hugged me fiercely. Later that evening, after the event, she sent me a single text. "You didn't just build Pulse. You became it." And she was right, because somewhere along the way, Pulse stopped being an app. It became a reflection of my growth, of the quiet resilience I had been building while the world thought I'd gone quiet. It was the culmination of every job I was overlooked for, every family dinner where no one asked what I was working on, every time I watched someone like Danielle be celebrated for flash while I buried myself in depth. It was also a testament to something else. That success isn't loud. Sometimes it's silent, like healing, like self-respect, like getting up every day and choosing yourself, even when no one else does. After the forum, things moved fast. We got featured in a mid-sized wellness journal. 2 universities reached out for partnerships. A large tech company asked if we'd consider licensing. I politely declined. Because I wasn't building Pulse to sell. I was building it to serve. Danielle and I stayed in touch after that. Not close exactly, but cordial. Something had shifted between us. Mutual respect. She even invited me to speak at her company's Innovation Summit. I declined that one. Not because I was bitter, but because I'd outgrown the need to prove myself in front of her circles. My worth was no longer defined by how Danielle saw me. Or anyone else, for that matter. One day, a few months after the panel, I got a package in the mail. No return label. Inside was a framed photo. My Atlanta office, sun filtering in through the window. Gerald the fern in the corner. On the glass was a sticky note that read, "This changed everything."
D.
I smiled, heartful. Because closure doesn't always come with grand apologies or viral karma. Sometimes it comes in quiet acknowledgments, in the sound of your own breath steady, grounded, in the way your shoulders don't tense up when your past walks into the room. I wasn't the backup plan anymore. I wasn't the girl with that little project. I was the founder of something real, something healing, something that mattered. And finally, I believed it too. If you're still listening, if you made it all the way here, then maybe you've been where I was. Overlooked, talked over. Assigned the role of the quiet one, the nice one, the one with potential, maybe someday. Maybe you felt the weight of being underestimated by your own family, of watching people who doubted you climb ladders you were too kind or too tired to climb yourself. Maybe you've swallowed your dreams so many times they started tasting like shame. If that's you, let me say this clearly. You don't owe anyone your noise. Your quiet is not your weakness. Your calm doesn't mean you aren't capable of storms. The world likes to measure people in metrics they can see: loud success, big salaries, name tags, titles. But the deepest work, the real work, it happens in silence. In those moments no one sees, when you choose to keep going despite the emptiness. When you build something meaningful from the cracks of rejection. When you keep showing up for yourself, even when no one claps. I used to think I had to wait for someone to believe in me, to vouch for me, to validate my worth. But sometimes the people around you can't see your potential because they're too busy projecting their own limits onto you. So here's what I've learned.
Start anyway.
Even if they roll their eyes. Even if they call it cute. Even if they forget to ask how it's going.
Build anyway.
Even if it's just you and your laptop in the middle of the night. Even if you have no idea where it's leading. Even if your only supporter is your cat. Stay kind, but be fierce. Don't let their doubts seep into your bones. Don't let their success stories rewrite your own. And when the time comes when they finally see you, don't build your identity around their recognition. Let their surprise be background music, not your soundtrack. Because the real glow-up isn't when they notice you.
It's when you no longer need them to.
My story isn't about revenge. It's not even about proving Danielle wrong. It's about proving myself right. That I was always capable. That I was never less than. That I just needed time, space, and trust to rise on my own terms. So, if you're sitting there wondering when it'll be your turn, it already is. The minute you stop seeking permission. The second you start writing your own metrics. The moment you realize you don't need to be loud to be powerful. That's when it begins. And one day, when they walk into your office, when they sit across from the very desk they mocked, they won't even have to say a word. Because your presence will say everything. Now go build. Silently if you must, but boldly.